Snobby, first-class passenger, demands poor man be removed, doesn't know he's the airline owner. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport as passengers began boarding Flight 1847 to Boston. Among them was a man who looked distinctly out of place in the first-class boarding line. At least that's what several passengers thought as they watched him approach the gate. His name was Robert Sullivan, and at 61 years old, he embodied a peculiar contradiction that would soon become apparent to everyone on board. He wore faded Carhartt work pants, a flannel shirt that had seen countless washings, and steel-toed boots caked with what appeared to be mud or concrete dust. His gray hair needed a trim, his face showed several days of stubble, and he carried a battered canvas tool bag instead of proper luggage. What the other passengers didn't know, what Robert deliberately obscured, was that he owned the airline they were about to fly on. Sullivan Airways had started 40 years ago with a single purchased Boeing 737 and a dream of connecting small Pacific Northwest cities to major hubs. Robert had been the pilot, the mechanic, the ticket agent, and the janitor, all rolled into one. He had slept in airports, eaten vending machine food for weeks at a time, and personally repaired his aircraft in the middle of the night to make morning flights. 4 decades later, Sullivan Airways was a regional powerhouse with 82 aircraft, 3,000 employees, and routes spanning from Alaska to Southern California. The company's valuation had recently hit $4 billion. Robert's personal net worth was estimated at $900 million. But Robert had never forgotten those early days of struggle. He still held a pilot's license and occasionally flew routes unannounced. He still showed up at maintenance facilities at 3 a.m. to work alongside mechanics. He still believed that you couldn't lead a company if you didn't understand every job within it. Today's appearance wasn't an accident. Robert had spent the previous evening at Sullivan Airways' Seattle maintenance facility personally inspecting a safety issue that had been reported on one of their 737s. He had crawled into wheel wells, checked hydraulic lines, and gotten thoroughly dirty in the process. His overnight bag with clean clothes was in his truck in long-term parking, but his flight was boarding now, and he had made a split-second decision to board, as he was, rather than miss the flight. He knew he looked rough. He didn't care. Comfort and practicality had always mattered more to him than appearance. The gate agent scanning boarding passes was Michelle Torres, a 23-year-old who had been with Sullivan Airways for 8 months. She didn't recognize Robert. Few frontline employees did, as he deliberately avoided publicity and rarely visited customer-facing areas in his executive capacity. "Good morning, sir," Michelle said with practiced cheerfulness as Robert approached. "Boarding pass, please." Robert handed over his phone, showing the mobile boarding pass. Michelle scanned it, and her screen showed Seat 2A, first-class window seat. Her eyes widened slightly as she glanced from the screen to Robert's work-worn appearance, but her professional training held. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Sullivan. You're in Seat 2A today. Have a great flight." "Thank you," Robert said with a warm smile, appreciating her professionalism. As Robert proceeded down the jetway, he heard a voice behind him, sharp, imperious, dripping with entitlement. "Excuse me, is that man actually in first class?" Robert glanced back to see a woman in her late 40s, dressed in an expensive business suit, designer handbag clutched under one arm, looking at Michelle with an expression of scandalized disbelief. "Yes, ma'am," Michelle replied carefully. "He's a first-class passenger. That's unacceptable, the woman declared. Look at him. He's filthy. His clothes are disgusting. He probably hasn't showered in days. I'm in first class, and I paid a premium for a certain level of experience. That experience does not include sitting near homeless people. Robert paused at the aircraft door, listening. He had heard variations of this attitude before, but it never ceased to amaze him how quickly people judged based on appearance. Ma'am, all our first-class passengers have valid tickets, Michelle said, her voice remaining steady despite the confrontation. I can't. I want to speak to a supervisor, the woman interrupted. Immediately. This is discrimination against paying customers. I shouldn't have to share space with someone who looks like they crawled out of a construction site. The woman's name, Robert would soon learn, was Diane Whitmore, and she was a pharmaceutical sales executive who flew first class weekly, convinced that her frequent travel and spending entitled her to dictate who else could occupy premium cabin space. A supervisor appeared, Tom Chen, a 10-year veteran of Sullivan Airways, who definitely recognized Robert. Tom's eyes widened when he saw his CEO standing at the aircraft door in work clothes, clearly having overheard the entire exchange. Robert gave Tom a tiny shake of his head and a slight smile. Don't blow my cover. Let this play out. Tom, understanding, immediately turned to Diane. I'm the gate supervisor. How can I help you? That man, Diane pointed at Robert's back, is boarding first class dressed like a day laborer. It's inappropriate and offensive to other passengers who paid for a premium experience. I understand your concern, Tom said diplomatically. However, Mr. Sullivan has a valid first-class ticket and has done nothing to warrant being removed from the flight. His appearance is enough, Diane insisted. Sullivan Airways has a reputation to maintain. Allowing people who look like that in first class damages your brand. Our brand is built on treating all passengers with dignity and respect, Tom said, his voice firm now. We don't judge passengers based on their clothing choices. Then maybe I should fly with a different airline, Diane threatened. One that understands the value of maintaining standards. That's certainly your prerogative, ma'am, Tom replied. But if you've checked luggage, we'd need to remove it from the aircraft, which would delay departure. Diane's face reddened with anger. She had been called on her bluff. Fine. But I'm filing a formal complaint, and I'll be taking my business elsewhere in the future. I'm sorry you feel that way, Tom said, maintaining his professional demeanor. Safe travels. Robert had boarded during this exchange, finding his seat in the first-class cabin. The configuration was 2-2, with 2 seats on each side of the aisle. His seat, 2A, was on the left side by the window. The seat next to him, 2B, was still empty. The first-class cabin was already half full. A businessman across the aisle gave Robert a curious glance, but said nothing. A young couple in the row behind whispered to each other. Robert caught the words, construction worker, and probably upgraded with miles. Let them think what they want, Robert thought. He pulled out his worn copy of a management book, ironically, a text about servant leadership and staying connected to front-line employees, and began reading. Diane Whitmore appeared in the cabin rolling her expensive carry-on, checking her boarding pass against the seat numbers. Her face registered horror when she realized she was in 2B directly next to Robert. You have got to be kidding me, she muttered loudly. Robert looked up from his book. Problem? Yes, there's a problem, Diane said, not bothering to lower her voice. I'm supposed to be sitting next to you, which is completely unacceptable. I'll try not to take that personally, Robert said mildly. Oh, I mean it personally, Diane replied. You're dirty. You smell like grease or cement or God knows what, and you clearly don't belong in first class. The flight attendant, an experienced crew member named Jennifer Park, approached. Is there an issue? Yes, Diane said immediately. I need a different seat. Away from him. She gestured at Robert as if he were toxic waste. Jennifer glanced at Robert, who gave her a slight smile and a small shrug. She didn't recognize him either, but something about his calm demeanor in the face of such rudeness impressed her. I'm sorry, ma'am, but first class is fully booked. There are no other available seats. Then put me in economy and upgrade me on the next flight, Diane demanded. Economy is also full, Jennifer said. This is a very popular route, but I can certainly help you book a different flight if you prefer. Diane checked her watch with an irritated huff. I have a meeting in Boston at 2 o'clock. I can't take a later flight. She glared at Robert. I guess I'm stuck with this. She shoved her carry-on into the overhead bin with excessive force, then dropped into seat 2B, immediately angling her body as far toward the aisle as possible, creating maximum distance from Robert. Just so we're clear, she said to Jennifer, I'm documenting this entire experience. Sullivan Airways is going to hear from me, my lawyer, and possibly the media, about how you treat your premium customers. I'm sorry you're unhappy, Jennifer said professionally. Can I get you something to drink before we depart? Champagne. The good stuff, not whatever cheap substitute you usually serve. As Jennifer moved away, Diane pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, presumably the complaint she had threatened. Robert returned to his book, but Diane wasn't finished. I don't understand how you even afforded a first-class ticket, she said, not looking at him. Did you save up for months? Is this your one big splurge? Something like that, Robert said without elaborating. Well, I fly first class every week, Diane announced. Multiple times a week, actually. I'm a Gold Elite member. I've probably spent $50,000 with this airline in the past year alone. I know what premium service should look like, and having to sit next to someone dressed for manual labor is not it. I can see how that would be distressing for you, Robert said, his tone so neutral it was impossible to tell if he was being sincere or sarcastic. More passengers boarded, and several cast curious glances at Robert. A few looked sympathetic. Others seemed to share Diane's visible distaste. Robert noted each reaction with interest, mentally cataloging the various expressions of class prejudice on display. When boarding was complete and the aircraft door closed, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Good morning, folks. This is Captain Lisa Morrison. We've got a beautiful day for flying, and we should have you in Boston in just under 5 hours. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Captain Morrison was one of Sullivan Airways' most senior pilots and had flown with Robert personally dozens of times. She knew he was on board the manifest always flagged when the CEO was traveling, but she had been briefed years ago to treat such situations normally unless Robert indicated otherwise. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Jennifer returned with drinks. She placed Diane's champagne on her tray table without comment, then turned to Robert. Mr. Sullivan, can I get you something to drink? The use of his name was automatic. Good flight attendants memorized their first-class passengers' names, but Diane's head whipped around at the sound of it. Just water. Please, Jennifer, Robert said. Thank you. Of course. And Mr. Sullivan, I wanted to let you know the crew is really happy you're flying with us today. It was a small statement, but Jennifer had deliberately phrased it in a way that suggested Robert was more than just a regular passenger. She had noticed Diane's behavior, and while she didn't know Robert was the CEO, she had decided to subtly indicate that he was someone deserving of respect. After Jennifer moved away, Diane turned to Robert with narrowed eyes. Why did she say the crew is happy you're flying today? And she called you Mr. Sullivan. You have the same last name as the airline. It's a common name, Robert said. Not that common, Diane persisted. Who are you? Just a passenger like you. No, there's something else. The gate supervisor called you Mr. Sullivan, too, and that flight attendant acted like you were someone important. Maybe she's just professional with all passengers, Robert suggested. She wasn't that polite to me, Diane said. Then with sudden suspicion, are you some kind of secret shopper? Someone the airline sent to evaluate service? No, nothing like that. Then what? Because you're clearly not just a random construction worker who lucked into a first-class seat. Robert set down his book and looked at her directly. Why does it matter whether I'm a construction worker or a CEO or anything in between? Why does my identity change how I should be treated? Because different people deserve different levels of respect, Diane said, as if this were obvious. A CEO has earned respect through achievement. A construction worker is just manual labor, replaceable, unimportant. You don't believe that, Robert said. Of course I do. It's reality. Society is hierarchical. Some people matter more than others. That's not cruel. It's just honest. And you matter more because you fly first class, weekly. I matter more because I'm successful, Diane corrected. I built a career. I earn a substantial income. I contribute to the economy. That's worth something. And construction workers don't contribute to the economy, Robert asked. Who do you think built the airport we just left? The aircraft we're sitting in? Your office building? They're paid to do that, Diane said dismissively. It's not the same as professional achievement. Anyone with a strong back can swing a hammer. It takes skill and intelligence to succeed in corporate America. Robert thought about the skilled mechanics he had worked with the night before, the years of training and experience required to maintain aircraft, the precision and problem-solving involved. But he didn't argue the point. Instead, he asked, so if I told you I was a construction worker, you'd believe I deserve the treatment you've been giving me. If you were a construction worker, yes, Diane said, because then you'd be someone who doesn't understand the standards and expectations of first-class travel. You'd be out of your element, probably making other passengers uncomfortable. And if I told you I was a CEO, Diane laughed. Then I'd know you were lying. You were... CEOs don't dress like that. They understand the importance of presentation, of maintaining an image consistent with their position. Interesting, Robert said. He pulled out his phone and typed briefly, then showed Diane the screen. It displayed the Sullivan Airways company website with a small About Us section. There was Robert's photo in a suit, admittedly, but clearly the same person, along with his title, Robert Sullivan, founder and CEO. Diane stared at the screen, her champagne forgotten in her hand. Her face cycled through expressions, confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, pure panic. That can't be, she stammered. I founded Sullivan Airways 40 years ago, Robert said calmly. I own 63% of the company. I'm the person you've been threatening to complain to take your business away from, to contact with your lawyer. The color drained from Diane's face completely. Oh my God. I was working late at our maintenance facility last night, Robert continued. Got dirty checking on a safety issue with one of our 737s. I could have gone home to shower and change, but I would have missed this flight. So I boarded as I was figuring comfort mattered more than appearance. I didn't know, Diane whispered. Exactly, Robert said. You didn't know who I was, so you felt entitled to treat me with contempt, to demand I be removed from the flight, to loudly complain about my presence as if I were contaminating your space. Other passengers were listening now, the conversation having escalated enough to draw attention. Several had pulled out their phones. Mr. Sullivan, I apologize, Diane said desperately. I made a terrible mistake. If you had known, you would have treated me differently, Robert interrupted, which is exactly the problem. Human dignity shouldn't be conditional on someone's job title or bank account. Every person deserves basic respect. I understand that, but do you? Robert challenged. Because you literally just told me that construction workers are replaceable and unimportant. That manual labor doesn't deserve the same respect as corporate achievement. That society is hierarchical and some people matter more than others. Diane had no response. Tears were forming in her eyes now. Whether from shame or fear of consequences, Robert couldn't tell. Here's what's going to happen. Robert said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. You're going to finish this flight. You're going to think very carefully about the attitudes you've expressed today. And when we land, you're going to decide what kind of person you want to be. Am I banned from flying Sullivan Airways? Diane asked, in a small voice. No, Robert said. Though, frankly, after your behavior, I'd be justified in banning you. But that would be petty, and it wouldn't actually teach you anything. So instead, I'm giving you a choice. What choice? You can continue being the person you've been today, someone who judges worth by appearance, who treats service workers with disdain, who believes success entitles you to look down on others. Or you can choose to grow from this experience, to recognize that the way you've been acting is ugly, that your prejudices are harmful, and that you have the power to be better. Jennifer reappeared, having overheard at least part of the conversation. Mr. Sullivan, is everything all right? Do you need me to address this situation? Several passengers gasped at Jennifer's deferential tone toward Robert, confirming what Diane had already realized. This wasn't just any passenger. This was the CEO, the owner, the person who controlled the entire airline. Everything's fine, Jennifer, Robert said warmly. Ms. Whitmore and I are just having a conversation about respect and dignity. I think it's been educational for both of us. After Jennifer moved away, Diane spoke quietly. What happens to me now? Are you going to tell my company? Publicize this ruin my reputation. What would that accomplish? Robert asked. Public humiliation might feel satisfying, but it doesn't actually create change. It just creates resentment. So, nothing happens to me. Oh, something happens, Robert said. You have to live with the knowledge of how you behaved. You have to look at yourself and decide if this is who you want to be. That's a much heavier consequence than anything I could impose externally. The flight continued. Meals were served. Diane barely touched hers, while Robert ate with appreciation, complimenting Jennifer on the quality. Other passengers kept glancing toward the row 2, clearly fascinated by the drama unfolding. About 3 hours into the flight, Diane finally spoke again. "Mr. Sullivan, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you dress like that? I mean, you're a billionaire. You could afford the finest clothes, the best of everything. Why work in maintenance facilities? Why fly commercial at all? You could have private jets." "I do have access to a company jet," Robert said, "but it's for emergency situations, or when I need to visit multiple cities in a day. For single destination trips, commercial flights make more economic sense. But the clothes, the work in maintenance facilities, I dress for the task at hand," Robert explained. "When I'm doing board meetings, I wear a suit. When I'm inspecting aircraft maintenance, I wear work clothes. Seems pretty simple to me. But don't you want people to know who you are? To recognize your success?" "Why?" Robert asked genuinely. "What does recognition get me?" "My success isn't dependent on whether strangers in an airport know who I am. The work speaks for itself. But people treat you differently when they know you're important." "Exactly," Robert said. "And that's the problem. People should treat everyone with basic decency, not just people they think are important. The fact that you treated me terribly until you learned the identity proves that your respect is conditional. That's not real respect. That's just social calculation." Diane absorbed this silently. "I used to be different," she said finally. "When I was starting out, when I was struggling. I was kinder then, more empathetic. But the more successful I became, the more, I don't know, entitled I felt. Like I had earned the right to judge others." "Success doesn't entitle you to cruelty," Robert said. "If anything, success should increase your empathy. You've achieved things. That should make you more aware of how hard the journey is, more appreciative of people still struggling." "I lost that somewhere along the way," Diane admitted. "I became the kind of person I would have hated when I was younger." "Then be someone different," Robert suggested. "It's never too late to change." As the aircraft began its descent into Boston, Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're starting our initial descent. We should be on the ground in about 20 minutes. And I want to take a moment to address something." Robert tensed slightly. He had a feeling he knew what was coming. "We have a very special passenger on board today," Captain Morrison continued. "Our founder and CEO, Robert Sullivan, is flying with us. Now, some of you might be wondering why our CEO is dressed in work clothes and flying commercial instead of private. The answer is simple. Mr. Sullivan believes in staying connected to the real work of running an airline. He spent last night in our Seattle maintenance facility personally inspecting a safety issue. He's on this flight because he flies our routes regularly to understand the passenger experience firsthand." Passengers turned to look at row 2, many now raising their phones to photograph or video Robert. "Mr. Sullivan founded this airline 40 years ago with one aircraft and a dream," Captain Morrison went on. "Today, Sullivan Airways employs 3,000 people and serves millions of passengers annually. But Mr. Sullivan has never forgotten where he came from. He still holds a pilot's license. He still works alongside mechanics. He still believes that every job in this company matters, from the CEO to the newest baggage handler." The captain paused. I'm telling you this because Mr. Sullivan's presence on this flight has apparently caused some discussion. Some passengers have made judgments based on his appearance. Some have treated him with disrespect. And I want those passengers to understand something. The way you treat people you don't recognize as important reveals who you really are. Mr. Sullivan doesn't need your respect because he's a CEO. He deserves your respect because he's a human being. We all do. The cabin was absolutely silent except for the engines. Thank you for flying Sullivan Airways, Captain Morrison concluded. We'll be on the ground shortly. Diane sat frozen, tears now streaming down her face openly. Several passengers were applauding, though whether they were applauding Robert or the captain's message, it wasn't clear. "I'm so sorry," Diane whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know," Robert said. "The question is, what will you do with that sorry? Will you just feel bad temporarily and then go back to your old patterns? Or will you actually change?" "I don't know how to change," Diane admitted. "I've been this way for so long." "Start small," Robert suggested. "Start by treating service workers with genuine appreciation. Thank the barista who makes your coffee. Ask the janitor about their day. Learn the names of flight attendants instead of just snapping your fingers for service. Practice seeing people as individuals, not as functions." "That seems too simple." "Most important changes start simply," Robert said. "Grand gestures are easy. Consistent small acts of respect and kindness, that's the hard work." The aircraft landed smoothly and taxied to the gate. As passengers prepared to disembark, Jennifer approached Robert. "Mr. Sullivan, it's been an honor having you on board. I hope, despite the situation, you had an acceptable flight." "More than acceptable, Jennifer," Robert said warmly. "You handled a difficult situation with professionalism and grace. Thank you." After Jennifer moved away, Robert turned to Diane one final time. "Ms. Whitmore, I genuinely hope today becomes a turning point for you, not because of the embarrassment, but because you recognize an opportunity to be better." "Can I ask one more thing?" Diane said. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were from the beginning? You could have avoided all of this." "But then I wouldn't have learned anything," Robert said. "I wouldn't have seen how passengers treat people they perceive as beneath them. I wouldn't have understood the prejudices that exist in my own first-class cabins. This was uncomfortable, yes, but it was also valuable information about the culture we're creating. So I was, what a test subject. You were a person revealing who she is when she thinks there are no consequences," Robert said. "That's valuable data." As they disembarked, several passengers approached Robert to shake his hand or take photos. He obliged everyone graciously, though he clearly found the attention uncomfortable. Diane hung back, unsure whether to approach or simply disappear. Finally, she gathered her courage and approached him in the terminal. "Mr. Sullivan, I just want to say again, I know." Robert interrupted gently. "You're sorry. I believe you. Now show me through actions, not words. Become someone who treats all people with dignity. That's the only apology I need." He walked away toward ground transportation, leaving Diane standing alone with her expensive luggage and her expensive clothes and her shattered assumptions about what made someone worthy of respect. 2 months later, Robert received a letter. It was from Diane Whitmore, handwritten on plain stationery. Mr. Sullivan, I've spent every day since our flight thinking about who I've become and who I want to be. I'm writing not to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but to let you know that your words had an impact. I've made changes. I started volunteering at a homeless shelter, serving meals and listening to stories. I've learned the names of every service worker I interact with regularly. I've been working with a therapist to understand why I developed such toxic attitudes toward people I perceived as beneath me. But the biggest change has been internal. I've started seeing people as human beings first, rather than as members of hierarchies. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionized how I move through the world. I still fly Sullivan Airways. I hope that's okay. Every flight reminds me of the lesson I learned that day. I treat the flight attendants with respect. I don't complain about trivial things. I try to be the kind of passenger who makes their jobs easier, not harder. I'm not telling you this to impress you or to get some kind of redemption. I'm telling you because you gave me a gift that day, even though it felt like punishment at the time. You showed me who I had become and gave me the opportunity to choose someone better. Thank you. Sincerely, Diane Whitmore. Robert read the letter twice, then filed it in his desk drawer. He hoped Diane's transformation was genuine and lasting. But even if it wasn't, even if she eventually reverted to old patterns, the experience had been worthwhile. Because Robert had learned something too. He had learned that class prejudice was alive and well even among people who should know better. He had learned that his airline needed better training for handling such situations. He had learned that sometimes the most valuable insights came from uncomfortable experiences. He kept wearing his work clothes when the task called for it. He kept flying commercial routes regularly. He kept working alongside mechanics and baggage handlers and pilots. And whenever someone expressed surprise or disdain at his appearance, Robert smiled and remembered that day on Flight 1847 when a snobby passenger demanded a poor man be removed, not knowing he owned the entire airline. It was a reminder that dignity wasn't conferred by recognition or validated by expensive clothes. It was inherent to being human. And no amount of success or wealth or status should ever make you forget that. That was the lesson of the airline owner in work boots. And it was a lesson worth teaching one uncomfortable flight at a time.